Looks like we got a really full lineup tonight, so really a lot of great speakers there. I'm going to hit some of the highlights for the 2023 season, but also I want you to know this is an anniversary year, actually. 15 years since Hurricane Ike. How many were here from, yeah, let's celebrate that, right? So how many were here for Ike 15 years ago? This was the first storm I dealt with. We actually moved to the area about 2 months prior to Hurricane Ike, and I wasn't surprised we were greeted by a major hurricane. And then 40 years ago, Alicia, 1983. How many of y'all were here for Alicia in 83? All right. Another anniversary, the 80th anniversary of the 1943 storm. How many of y'all were here for the 1943 storm? A couple people? All right. So you can see Alicia and Ike right there, both different storms. We'll talk about each of them tonight a little bit. So when is the hurricane season? Nominally, it starts June 1st, ends November 30th. But we've had quite a few May storms in recent years. Don't be shocked if we have a late May storm somewhere out there in the Atlantic. What this chart shows is basically an activity chart as we go through the season, all the way from May 1st through the end of the year. And the way you put together this timeline is you look back to all the way back to 1944, and you say if there's a storm on that date, count it as one, and you do that for every year, and you get a map like that. So what you see is, typically in the Atlantic, things kind of simmering along, really from late May all the way through the end of July. And then there's a big ramp up in activity, usually in August and September. Peak in September, and then we roll over there. If we can get to October, we're usually in pretty good shape in Texas. Late season storms, more likely to push off toward the east. How often do we get hurricanes? That's what these maps show here. So on the left-hand side, you see there's a return period for Galveston about every 9 years. A better way to think of it is there's about a 1 in 9 chance of getting a hurricane within 50 miles of Galveston on any given year, about a 1 in 9 chance. And then on the right-hand side, for a major hurricane, category 3 or greater, it's about a 1 in 25 chance. Now, one thing I want you all to know is most of our storms form in the Gulf. You know, we don't always have much time to prepare, so it's great you're here tonight. You're going to get ready for the hurricane season, so you're not scrambling when there's something brewing in the Gulf. If you look at the last 10 of these types of storms to hit Texas, all 10 either formed in the Gulf or redeveloped in the Gulf. In the case of Harvey, Harvey redevelops in the Gulf. And so, you know, keep that in mind. These Gulf developers don't give us a whole lot of time to get ready. Here's a look at the names for these storms laid out 6 years at a time. And then the 7th year, the list will be reused. So you see our list for 2023 there. If the name doesn't get retired, it'll be reused in 2029. So some of y'all may see your names up there. My name is sitting there in 2027, Danny. You know, that's the name I was as a kid, right? And so that has been reused several times. I remember seeing that as a kid, and it never really has amounted to much. So we're still waiting for Danny to make its mark. But if, like I say, if the storm has a big impact, like an Ike, like a Harvey, that name gets retired. And there's actually an international body that comes together. They debate all this. They say, should that storm be retired or not? And if it does get retired, they have to come up with a new name for that letter. Now, can anyone guess what the most retired letter is for a storm name? We have guess A. That's not right. H, we're getting close. H, we're getting close. K, we're close the other way. I, someone said it. I is actually the most retired letter. So there's a little bit of trivia for you. So we rate these storms based on the wind, Cat 1 through Cat 5. You can see the details there in the table or the quick look graphic there if you don't have the attention span to read all that information. Basically, Cat 1 is pretty bad. You know, Cat 1, 74 to 95 mile per hour winds. And then Cat 5. There's been 4 Cat 5 landfalls in U.S. history. You know, that's the worst of the worst. But you see the word wind in that scale. It is a wind scale. It is not an overall severity scale. It doesn't tell you about the rainfall or the storm surge or the tornadoes. And so when we had Ike, this was a problem for us. For people on Galveston and near the coast, they were saying things like, it's just a Category 2. Doesn't sound that bad to me. I'm not leaving. But we were seeing 15 feet of storm surge flooding with that storm as it came in. And so we were really concerned. And so the word wind was added to that scale so people understand what it is and what it isn't. It does tell you about the wind, but that's the main thing. Now we can kind of focus in on our coastline, and what we're looking at here are kind of some greatest hits for Galveston, 60 miles of Galveston, say Category 3 or greater. And you see the 1900 storm there, the 1900 Galveston hurricane, you know, our country's greatest natural disaster with 6,000 to 8,000 lives lost. And right after the 1900 storm, believe it or not, they built that seawall. It's an amazing engineering achievement. Built the seawall, raised Galveston Island on the seawall side about 10 feet. And so that was a good thing because right on the heels of it, 1909 and 1915, 2 powerful hurricanes you can see there tracking kind of the same way on into San Luis Pass area. And of course, then they moved on inland. And then you've got Alicia there in 1983. So that was the most recent major hurricane. You've got Rita in that circle as well. Didn't really track toward Texas as it turned out. It did turn more toward Louisiana. And then you see Audrey from back in the 50s, a very devastating hurricane. So, you know, what you can see just from this chart is these storms can come in frequently, or there can be long gaps in between. And really, our last one is Alicia in 83. Now, Ike was very, very close to a 3. It was just below 3. So, you know, by all rights, that should be there as well. And you can do a little bit of a different search and say Cat 2 or greater hurricane since 1900 within 30 miles of, say, Morgan's Point. And you get there now. Ike is showing up here on the map. You know, that was pretty much a direct hit on our area. And then there's this 1943 hurricane, kind of an interesting one called the Surprise Hurricane. This was during World War II. There were German U-boats in the Gulf. The War Department didn't want people to know about the hurricane. So, you know, even though hurricane forecasting wasn't really well advanced in 1943, what was known wasn't shared. And so this hurricane came right on in 1943. And what's interesting is I would give this talk in Morgan's Point, and this man would raise his hand and he would tell me about that hurricane. He actually had childhood memory of that storm. So that's another interesting one. So every storm is different, has some combination of these 5 hazards: damaging winds, flooding rains, storm surge flooding, and tornadoes, and also high surf and rip currents at the beaches. And for those that have lived here a while, you know every storm is different. Harvey was nothing like Ike, which is nothing like Allison. And you know, you name it. Even Alicia was different than any of those as well. But it has some combination of these 5 hazards. And of those 5 hazards, what are the most dangerous? By far the water-related hazards: storm surge flooding and flooding rains. Even though people think of the high winds in the hurricane, which are dangerous too, of course, it is the storm surge and the rainfall flooding that are the most dangerous. So let's talk about the parts of the hurricane now. Now, my family and I, we moved, like I said, to the area back in 2008. And sure enough, within a few months, we had a major hurricane. So my young family was having to evacuate with this very powerful hurricane coming in. So this is about 2 a.m. Saturday morning. You can see the eye of the hurricane over Galveston Bay. How many of y'all rode out the storm? Maybe we're here in Mont Belvieu for Hurricane Ike. So you remember the eye coming overhead in the wee hours of the morning, 2, 3 in the morning. And sure enough, that was true for us down there in League City as well. So we experienced the eye as you did. Winds pretty calm in the eye. Now the ring around the eye is a very important part of the hurricane. That's where the highest winds are. So you got the calm wind conditions in the eye, but the ring around it has the highest winds. The absolute highest winds in the storm are in this ring on the right-hand side of the track. We call this the eye wall. So all the areas in this eye wall, we're getting those hurricane force winds. 80, 90 mile per hour wind gusts, even here in Mont Belvieu. The other part of the hurricane I want to point out, these spiral bands spiraling out from the center. In these bands, especially on the right side, you can get tornadoes, gusty winds, and very heavy rain. So, think about Harvey as a contrast. In that case, the eye wall came in way far away, but we still got the spiral bands on the right-hand side. So we got the tornadoes, we got the very heavy rain. So talking a bit more about Harvey, for people down the coast, say in the Rockport area, this was very much a wind hurricane, Category 4 at landfall. We didn't get that because we weren't near the eye wall, but they sure did down there. You can see some of the wind damage there. But for us, we got the spiral bands. So we got 22 tornadoes in the area, and we got this record-setting amounts of rain. Now that's one thing for Southeast Texas. We have many rainfall records, including this one. This would be 60 inches of rain maximum for this storm. And it kind of reminds me, when I came to this weather office, I had worked in Virginia, North Carolina, and I was talking about Hurricane Floyd, where we had 11 inches of rain. And they said, Dan, that's nice, but here in Texas we measure rain in feet, not inches. And this was very much the case. This is a 5-foot rainstorm. Looking back at Allison, which was an early June tropical storm, that had 3 feet of rain in Southeast Texas. Here's a look at some of the big rainfall makers in this region. Like I said, Harvey, we're looking at a large area of 3 to 4 feet of rain, even up to 5 feet locally, including in this area. Claudette, 1979, 43 inches of rain in 24 hours in Alvin, Texas. That's also a national record. Allison at the time was considered maybe a once-in-a-lifetime storm, but when you compare it to Harvey, Harvey had much higher rainfall amounts over a larger area. So it almost makes Allison look very minor by comparison, but that was a very, very significant rain tropical storm, as we know. And then not too far after Harvey, we had Imelda, which had a tremendous amount of rain in its own right. Just 2 years later, in some of these areas in yellow, over 40 inches of rain in 18 hours. Some of those folks flooded out, and they didn't flood for Harvey. So point is, we can get a lot of rain here. And one takeaway from that is it's always a good idea to have flood insurance because your homeowner's policy won't cover the damage from this from flooding rains. All right, looking back now at Ike, like I say, I was sitting down there in League City. We were watching the hurricane come in. You see that big swirl there, that very large hurricane coming in right over Galveston Bay. The eye coming right in here over Mont Belvieu as well, getting those very high winds. And this is a very large hurricane. That's important because large storms push a lot of water onto land. Produce big storm surges. So we had a tremendous amount of storm surge flooding from Hurricane Ike. This is the Houston Chronicle headline the next day. It kind of tells the story. Big water surging across the Gulf Coast, plus widespread power loss from the winds. We had the winds, we had the surge from that direct hit from Hurricane Ike. You can see some of the coastal areas here. We got the Gulf of Mexico on the right side. We've got Galveston Bay on the left, and in between we have nothing but water. You know, basically Gulf of Mexico spilled into Galveston Bay. And so this is the Bolivar Peninsula here, you know, completely flooded. The other thing is, of course, we have a tremendous amount of waves and surf coming in on the coast. Now, I mentioned after the 1900 storm, the seawall was built. And I think it's kind of interesting to compare this Hurricane Ike photo with this one from 1915, the 1915 hurricane, both showing the seawall doing its job, taking a lot of that wave energy out of those big swells coming in from the hurricane and protecting the island. So the seawall's been doing its job now for 120 years, kind of amazingly. The other thing about storm surge is the water rise starts early, and I think that caught some people off guard on Bolivar and Galveston and around the bay, because the winds hadn't picked up, but the water, it starts coming up maybe 24 or 36 hours before the wind. So the key point here is if you're in a surge zone, you're going to want to get out before that happens. You know, get out a couple days before the storm gets here at least. Now, what areas flooded from Hurricane Ike? This was produced by Harris County Flood Control from National Weather Service data. And all these areas in red, greater than 10 feet of seawater above ground. Okay, these are values above ground. So you can see, and then Trinity Bay, there was a lot of high water pushed up into the bay as well. I still remember taking that bridge on I-10 over the bay, seeing all that debris up in the higher parts of the bridge there, indicating how high the water had gotten, and the wind too taking that up. But if you can see how far to the right of the center track the surge occurred. Actually, if you follow that all the way to the Florida Panhandle, there was significant surge from Hurricane Ike. Remember this, large hurricane, big storm surge, especially near and to the right of the track. That was true for Hurricane Carla as well. Pushed a lot of water up into the bay. But Ike was so powerful, it actually caused quite a bit of flooding even left of the track. It's just, it would have been so much worse for Galveston Bay, western shore, had it come in just down the coast. And you know, we talk about getting people out of the surge zone and how important that is, and convincing people to leave. And you see why here. This is Bolivar Peninsula. This is this little barrier island up the coast from Galveston, as we know. There's no seawall there. It's low, like Galveston was back in 1900. And that stretch of land was pretty much cleared down to the slab of all the homes there, except one. There was this one home that somehow withstood some of that powerful currents and wave action. So, but this is really unsurvivable. You know, you have to somehow convince people here to leave, and a lot of people could be stubborn about that. You know, they think, oh, it's a Category 2, this is a hurricane, I've seen them before. You know, they don't leave until and then they want to leave, and by then it's too late. Just some more scenes from the storm surge from Hurricane Ike back in 2008. You see this here along 45 heading into Galveston. This is Surfside here, Galveston again, and I believe this is Bolivar here. And of course, a lot of the debris from Bolivar ended up in Chambers County. Actually, you know, going back here, you see the inland extent of the storm surge flooding well into Chambers, almost up to I-10. And there were, as you recall, some big debris lines here, you know, big mounds of debris. So that's what happens at the inland extent of the surge. You get this pile up of debris. Just a few more scenes around Galveston Bay, Seabrook area in this case. You see all the debris up on the roadway. You know, something that comes to mind here is, you know, when is it safe to come back to a community? You know, that's one thing we deal with in hurricane country too. Maybe you've evacuated, you want to come back and check on your home, but your local officials, you know, have to coordinate that with you. You know, either through ID and such, and I know that'll be talked about tonight. Or they may say it's not safe to come back yet. But the emergency management folks here will address those issues. But the other big thing about Ike was all the power outages. A lot of people were without power for a week, 2 weeks, and more because it was a huge hurricane with a huge wind field. You can see some of the wind speeds here, the maximum wind speed analyzed, and so we can kind of eyeball it here. Here's Baytown, here's Mont Belvieu area. We were getting the highest winds, really, in the hurricane at that time. Looking at the orange here, we're talking about winds, up around 90 miles per hour wind gusts. Now, going back a bit further, again, another anniversary, Hurricane Alicia. Once again, you see the eye wall. It's that ring around the eye and the spiral bands we talked about. Alicia had all of those. The difference here is Alicia, look where it formed. It formed not too far offshore, and it went from a depression to a Category 3 landfall in about 60 hours. So think about that. A storm can form here one day, and next thing we know, we have a Category 3 hurricane coming in just a few days later. So, that can happen, and it's not that unusual, and that's why you prepare your kit. You make all your preparations now so you're ready to go if we do get a rapid developer like that. Just some scenes from Alicia now, back in '83. Alicia had surge too, but there was more wind damage even than Hurricane Ike. So you've got a lot of roofs taken off homes. The skyscrapers, they had windows broken left and right. It turns out there were gravel piles on top of a lot of these skyscrapers for whatever reason. I don't know really why. And so the wind took a lot of that and just riddled these windows on the skyscrapers. And some of that happened again with Ike. And then looking back a bit further, anyone have memories of Carla back in '61? Anyone in the audience? That was a very historic hurricane for the Texas coast. This was, to my knowledge, the first time a radar image of a hurricane was shown on TV. Dan Reilly back then kind of made his name with this storm. Once again, you see that characteristic donut shape there. That's that especially dangerous part of the hurricane, the eye wall with the high winds. In this case, the center tracked into Matagorda Bay, well to our south, but it pushed a tremendous amount of water into the bay. Remember, big hurricanes push a lot of water near and to the right of the track. And so Carla was certainly that. It was almost a Category 5. It was a large Category 4 hurricane, 170 mile an hour wind gusts in there in Matagorda Bay, plus a lot of surge into Galveston Bay as well. So getting to the forecast now, first thing I want to say is the normal season has been upped. Every 10 years, we use a new 30-year period for averages. And so you see, when I came here probably 3 years ago, I said the average number is 12 named storms, 6 hurricanes. Well, now the averages would be 14 and 7 because we've had more active seasons recently. So what is the forecast? Well, NOAA hasn't put their forecast out yet, but there are several that are out there, including Colorado State. You can see the average number is about 14 named storms. The forecast is for 13. Hurricanes 7 versus 6, major hurricanes 3 versus 2. What's going on here? So we're looking at a near average season perhaps according to this forecast, maybe a shade below average. We have something called El Nino climate pattern setting up a lot of wind shear over the Atlantic, so that tends to limit the number of storms. But the waters are also very warm. They're much warmer than average. So the person that put this forecast together, he admits there's kind of low confidence. But what I want to point out is it only takes one. Alicia occurred in '83. There were only 4 named storms all year. That's the quote-unquote quietest season in the Atlantic for 50 years, but we had a direct hit. So no matter what this forecast says, we need to prepare. The last thing I want to mention is we are putting out detailed weather briefings for your emergency managers. And then what we do is we record those and put them on social media and the web. We want you all to get the straight information from us. You know, we're going to give you the best scientific forecast we can. You know, we're not looking for viewers or anything like that. And so we want you to be plugged in and to know what to expect. This happens to be a briefing slide before any rain fell from Harvey. And you can see how hard we were hitting that. So plug in to our Facebook, our social media, and our website. So that's all I have. Anybody have any questions for me? All right, nothing heard. Thank y'all.